face 3 times. I just wanted to get out of there, and it's a double tech.
Those are the words of Luka Doncic, the most prolific scorer in the league right now, breaking down the precise altercation that triggered a suspension and erased $250,000 from his bank account. Yet while every camera lens locked onto Luka, Bronny James stood quietly in the periphery. And the perspective Bronny ultimately shared regarding that entire ordeal caught absolutely everyone off guard. When Luka finally pushed back on the evening of March 27, 2026, a truly remarkable sequence unfolded, a narrative so layered that your interpretation completely depended on where you happened to be looking. It shifted based entirely on whether your gaze was fixed upon the point total, focused intently on the rim, or scanning the reactions along the bench. Through every chaotic second of that sequence, Bronny James found himself anchored dead center in the storm. He was never merely watching from the background or acting as a historical footnote. He was fully engaged, competing out there as a vital piece of the rotation. Grasping the sheer gravity of that evening requires looking back at the absolute tear Luka Doncic had been on throughout the preceding weeks. We are talking about an athlete operating at the absolute peak of his powers. Far removed from any kind of slump, Doncic had been dominating the association, posting an unparalleled 33.7 points alongside 7.8 boards, and dictating the offense with 8.2 assists nightly through 62 grueling matchups of the 2025-26 campaign. Calling those statistics impressive feels like a massive understatement. That is the exact caliber of production that forces your name into hallowed debates alongside the absolute legends of the sport. It elevates a player onto the exact same pedestal as the immortal icons whose legacies are permanently etched into the foundational pillars of this organization. Throughout March specifically, his level of mastery reached such an ethereal tier that veteran broadcasters and late-night television anchors literally ran out of adjectives to capture what they were witnessing. Despite navigating only his maiden voyage with the organization, he immediately understood the immense weight behind the lore of this roster. Everyone understands the uncompromising standard of the purple and gold, recognizing the immense pressure that comes with donning those iconic colors inside that specific arena for such a demanding crowd. Yet Doncic paid tribute to that mythos by delivering absolute masterclasses efforts so profound that even the most critical, generationally spoiled supporters of the franchise struggled to properly measure his greatness against their storied past. Furthermore, his accuracy from beyond the perimeter had evolved into an entirely distinct spectacle of its own, mutating into an offensive tool so lethal that opposing coaching staffs spent countless hours drafting elaborate blueprints solely designed to deny him a fraction of breathing room on the outside. It elevated to a stratosphere that the extensive archives of this legendary club simply had no prior precedent for. Which brings us to LeBron James, a veteran who has personally authored and survived more eras of professional basketball than virtually anyone breathing today, a transcendent talent who no longer owes the game a single explanation, and stands undisputedly as the defining cornerstone of his respective era in Los Angeles. Even a titan like him fully embraced the reality that the Slovenian phenomenon's brilliance had to be fiercely shielded, carefully cultivated, and positioned as the absolute gravitational center of their entire offensive universe. This profound respect bled into casual conversation when the elder statesman discussed the recreational trips to the fairway that the roster utilized to build irreplaceable locker room chemistry. He openly admitted to stepping back and intentionally conceding a putt on the greens just to keep his young star's spirits high. He recognized that 18 holes pale in comparison to ensuring that when the arena dims at exactly 7 in the evening and the referee tosses the ball, their primary weapon takes the hardwood armed with an unbreakable swagger and pure, unadulterated passion. The underlying sentiment required no translation. The immediate future of this franchise operates entirely through their new prodigy. Every single peripheral detail, even a friendly wager on the back nine, bows to that ultimate objective. Fast forward to the evening of March 27, 2026, under the bright lights of Crypto.com Arena in downtown Los Angeles. The home squad was systematically picking apart the visiting Brooklyn Nets, cruising toward a decisive final tally of 116-99. It felt like a beautifully executed, remarkably low-stress exhibition of pure dominance. The star guard had effortlessly poured in 41 points entirely on his own, marking his second straight night eclipsing that elite scoring threshold and sealing his sixth 40-plus point eruption across a mere 12-game stretch. Long before the second-half buzzer even echoed through the building, the competitive spirit of the matchup had effectively evaporated. Yet, with exactly 5 minutes and 12 seconds left on the clock during that third period, the atmosphere drastically shifted. The referees blew the whistle, charging the franchise cornerstone with an offensive foul, a completely routine infraction that audiences witnessed countless times throughout a standard professional basketball schedule. It was a marginal, split-second decision made by a human being simply trying to officiate at the highest level of the sport. However, the true story unfolded strictly in the volatile moments following that dead ball. Brooklyn forward Ziaire Williams instantly closed the gap, stepping aggressively into the superstar's personal airspace while shouting intensely. Based on the official post-game breakdown provided by lead referee Sean Wright, the escalation saw the frustrated guard extend his arms in a clear pushing gesture, prompting his defender to strike back with a rapid swipe directly at his opponent's jaw. The officiating crew immediately halted the action to consult the courtside monitors. Following a meticulous examination of the replay, the staff assessed double technical fouls to the combatants, a thoroughly justified penalty if you strictly adhere to the black and white phrasing of the league rulebook. It felt like a deeply human sequence. A brief flash of temper entirely expected when alpha mentalities collide at the absolute pinnacle of competition. But the stakes were uniquely perilous here. Having entered the arena carrying 15 prior behavioral infractions on his seasonal resume, absorbing number 16 transcended a simple disciplinary warning from the league office. That specific whistle triggered an automatic, mandatory suspension. Standing before the microphone banks later that night, the visibly drained star addressed the press. He had literally just torched a professional defense for 41 points to secure a commanding victory. If rational logic applied to professional sports, he would have been glowing with deep satisfaction and triumphant energy. Instead, he was trapped at a podium, forced to defend 10 fleeting seconds of physical jawing buried deep within a meaningless third quarter, and the specific sentiment he offered the reporters.
He was in my face 3 times. I just wanted to get out of there. It's a double tech.
Struggling to process the suffocating reality of grown men invading his physical boundaries in a manner that crossed from competitive into deeply disrespectful. Furthermore, the high-definition footage confirmed his grievance without question. His opponent was relentlessly antagonistic. The psychological warfare was incredibly real, not some phantom slight invented by a sensitive superstar. Yet therein lies the tragic burden of existing as the franchise savior on March 27, 2026, while balancing on the razor's edge of a 15-foul disciplinary record. Retaliation simply ceases to be an option. You simply cannot respond, not with a sharp word, not with a subtle nudge, and certainly not with any gesture a trained referee might interpret as hostile retaliation. When you sit on the precipice of that 16th technical foul, one mistake demands the ultimate price of a mandatory 1-game suspension, period.
Of course, what can I say? I didn't even talk.
He continued.
I just wanted to get out of there. They say my push was exaggerated, which was obviously not. And I don't know what else to tell you.
That sense of exhaustion stems from a place of personal truth, because from his vantage point, he is entirely justified in believing that the entire confrontation was magnified far beyond its actual severity. Yet, existing concurrently alongside that truth is the stark reality that his actions in that split second were a profound miscalculation of his environment. The offense itself was barely a blip on the radar of typical hardwood physicalities, but it became devastating solely due to the suffocating corner he had painted himself into through months of relentless emotional accumulation. The margins for grace had vanished. The officials were never going to overturn that judgment in his favor. Not on that specific evening, and certainly not with the burden of 15 prior indiscretions hanging over his head. When March 28th, 2026 arrived, the league delivered its final, unyielding verdict. The decree was formalized and handed down directly from the office of James Jones, the executive vice president and commanding voice of basketball operations. The press release was delivered in the sterile, unfeeling vernacular typical of corporate sports discipline, yet the underlying message echoed with brutal, undeniable clarity throughout the basketball landscape. The verdict declared that Los Angeles Lakers superstar Luka Doncic would be forced to serve a mandatory one-game suspension, forfeiting his salary after crossing the threshold of his 16th emotional eruption during the 2025-26 campaign. The organization desperately mounted an appeal, hoping to capture lightning in a bottle twice. They had pulled off a similar administrative miracle just weeks prior, successfully overturning what would have been his 16th infraction during a tense battle with the Orlando Magic. On this occasion, however, their pleas fell on deaf ears. The penalty stood absolute, cementing a bitter reality. The franchise cornerstone would be confined to the locker room on March 30th, 2026, while his brothers went to war against the visiting Washington Wizards. The same transcendent force of nature who had spent the entire campaign systematically dismantling historic franchise records before awestruck crowds was now reduced to a mere spectator, forced to watch the action unfold while dressed in a helpless tailored suit. During a tense practice session on the eve of the matchup, specifically March 29th, Lakers head coach JJ Redick stepped before the microphones. The sentiments he shared regarding his sideline superstar, the very same generational talent he is now tasked with leading, and the fiery competitor he previously shed blood alongside during their shared tenure in Dallas. This is an athlete whose deep-seated psychological drive Redick comprehends on a profound level. His address to the press became a masterclass in subtext, carrying a profound emotional weight that stretched far beyond the simple vocabulary he chose to deploy.
He's disappointed, that he wants to be there for his teammates.
There is absolutely no hidden sense of relief here. No quiet gratitude that the grueling, bone-deep fatigue of an 82-game marathon has mercifully mandated a brief reprieve from the physical toll. His frustration is raw, unvarnished, and profoundly real. For a warrior of his caliber, lacing up his sneakers and taking the floor is never viewed as a mere contractual duty. It is the very essence of his existence and his legacy.
And I've talked about this all year. He plays. He's not a guy that takes games off and can be banged.
Redick had been in the trenches guiding this roster from day one. He possessed a front row seat to watch his leader battle through agonizing hamstring complications. Witnessing him endure the brutal, unforgiving gauntlet of a grueling 6-game journey away from home, he had observed him systematically dismantle defenses for 40 or more points on evenings when practically any other marquee name in the association would have rightfully demanded load management and watched from the safety of the bench. So when the head coach stood before those blinding cameras, the sentiments he offered transcended the typical, hollow platitudes so often relied upon by modern sports figures trying to kill time. It served as a powerful, unshakable testament to the unyielding mental fortitude of a man who was once his peer on the hardwood, illuminating the profound depth of his competitive spirit. Yet, it is precisely at this juncture that the narrative fractures into something far more compelling, a fascinating dichotomy that mainstream pundits largely overlooked in favor of simpler, louder headlines. As the storm of controversy reached its peak, with the catastrophic 16th penalty cemented into the box score and the grim reality of a looming absence dawning on the star guard as he navigated the arena corridors, a quietly monumental event was simultaneously unfolding under those exact same lights during the battle against Brooklyn, a milestone carrying an emotional weight that arguably eclipsed the drama surrounding the disciplinary actions. Inside the very same 48 minutes of basketball that witnessed a superstar's frustration boil over into suspension territory, an aging king and his heir apparent achieved a milestone that fundamentally altered the fabric of basketball history forever. Never before in the sprawling, storied archives of the association had such an intimately profound sequence materialized on the hardwood. A father deliberately threading the needle to find his own flesh and blood during live, consequential competition. The young rookie rose up with absolute poise and buried the jumper. It was the purest manifestation of legacy realized, the legendary patriarch delivering the assist and the son executing a flawless connection from beyond the three-point arc. This breathtaking culmination demanded over 20 grueling years of unwavering vision, bridging the quiet, humble driveways of Northeast Ohio directly to the blinding, relentless spotlight of Los Angeles.
Well, I mean, I think not take it for granted and just, being in the moment of us being on the floor once again.
while one cornerstone of the franchise was visibly suffocating beneath the immense pressure of his own competitive inferno, ultimately resulting in his mandated banishment from the impending battle. Another young athlete, draped in identical purple and gold armor, was discovering a profound, quiet serenity amid the chaos. He radiated an unvarnished, authentic appreciation merely for the opportunity to breathe the air of the arena, anchoring his soul to the sheer privilege of existence within that echo chamber. He found peace in the polished wood beneath his sneakers, the comforting rhythm of the rock leaving his mentor's fingertips, and the poetic finality of the net snapping in his wake. The sheer dichotomy of those intersecting paths, the white-hot, consuming rage of a superstar wrestling with his own limitations, juxtaposed sharply against a rookie's tranquil, intensely focused, and profoundly thankful disposition, serves as the true, unspoken thesis regarding the spiritual state of this historic franchise on the 27th of March, 2026. Two vastly different humans were inhaling the identical arena atmosphere, operating within the exact same structural framework of a professional contest, yet internalizing their realities through entirely divergent emotional lenses. The ripple effect of that fateful evening guaranteed that the agonizing disciplinary fallout endured by the veteran would inevitably pry open a legitimate, deeply consequential window of opportunity for the unproven apprentice. However, before unpacking the intricacies of that impending passing of the torch, we must address a lingering curiosity that inevitably arises for anyone watching from the periphery, and it is a tremendously valid inquiry to explore. Did destiny truly mandate this punitive outcome? Are we entirely certain that this chaotic evening marked the absolute first instance during the campaign where the brilliant playmaker crossed that fateful 16th infraction threshold? The reality of the situation requires meticulous attention, because if your focus wavered for even a fraction of a second during the turbulent opening weeks of the month, if you failed to trace the subtle breadcrumbs of escalating tensions, you likely missed a sprawling, dramatic prelude. It is a hidden chapter of administrative warfare that the national punditry has almost entirely neglected to appropriately analyze. This buried narrative weaves through a dark labyrinth of vicious on-court verbal warfare, deeply personal accusations of crossing familial boundaries, and a high-stakes, closed-door tribunal convened by the association's ultimate power brokers, ultimately culminating in a tense standoff where the governing body stood mere inches away from dropping the executioner's axe and exiling him. Exactly 14 days prior to this current inescapable reality, a relentless cycle of habits, history, and ultimately, a heavy toll. When Luka was handed that suspension on March 30th, 2026, it was the climax of a story that had been writing itself for months. This wasn't some sudden stroke of cosmic misfortune raining down from the basketball gods, unfairly targeting an innocent superstar when the stakes were absolutely critical. The events that unfolded on the hardwood against the Brooklyn Nets on March 27th were far from an anomaly. It certainly wasn't some grand injustice, nor was it, as the frantic echo chambers of social media desperately tried to spin it, a calculated conspiracy engineered by the league to deliberately sabotage its most mesmerizing generational talent. To truly grasp the gravity of the moment, we have to strip away the emotion and look at the cold, hard mechanics of the rulebook itself. The league mandate is absolute. The second a competitor racks up 16 technical fouls within a single regular season campaign, they are immediately stripped of a game check and banished for one contest. No disciplinary panel convenes to debate the nuances. The emotional weight of the situation is entirely ignored by the governing body. Once that ultimate red line is crossed, there is absolutely no appeals board or safety net that can stop the inevitable ban from taking effect. While the front office occasionally wipes a singular violation from the slate before disaster strikes, the very second that tally hits 16, a player's fate is sealed. But the hidden danger, the psychological tightrope that has the Los Angeles faithful holding their collective breath for the rest of the year, is the unforgiving reality of life beyond that 16th whistle. For every pair of infractions a player is tagged with after surviving that dreaded 16th marker, the league hammer drops again with another mandatory absence. Reaching 18 guarantees a second night in street clothes, while hitting 20 forces a third game away from the court. This disciplinary ladder is brutally unsympathetic. It pays zero mind to the caliber of your rival, the championship implications of the night, or how legitimately your fury was ignited. Rewind to earlier in March. When the intensity boiled over against the Orlando Magic, Luka found himself locked in a heated, jawing match with big man Goga Bitadze. The raw context surrounding that specific clash was undeniably volatile, carrying the kind of deeply personal weight that tests a man's restraint. The superstar stood firm that a deeply offensive line about his loved ones had been crossed in the heat of battle, a heavy accusation that the opposing center vigorously brushed off later. Yet, stripping away the mystery of those unheard words, the officiating crew simply witnessed an erupting volcano of trash talk that strictly demanded a whistle. That split-second judgment officially dragged his season total right to the brink, marking his 16th violation of the 2025-26 campaign. The franchise immediately went to bat for their leader. The brass reviewed the tape, and in a shocking pivot that defied the cynical expectations of every veteran basketball mind, the league wiped the penalty away. The punishment evaporated. He was miraculously reset to 15, gifted a profound lifeline that the central office was under absolutely no mandate to provide. The league hierarchy had already shown a rare flash of leniency by wiping that Orlando dust-up from the permanent ledger. Expecting them to pivot a mere 2 weeks down the road and casually erase yet another massive lapse in judgment, especially a fiery moment featuring clear-cut physicality broadcast directly to the replay center, would demand a degree of favoritism that simply cannot exist, even for a perennial most valuable player candidate. Looking deeply into the arc of his 8-year professional journey, 7 foundational chapters in Texas before donning the purple and gold, he has perpetually lived at the very summit of the association's most disciplined players. And the anatomy of these breakdowns rarely deviates from a familiar script. It usually stems from a whistle he views as a profound injustice, or a referee whose wildly shifting standards finally break his immense concentration. It is always that boiling point where his legendary competitive fire simply overwhelms the dam of his own self-restraint. Let us be incredibly clear, there is zero malice in his heart. He has absolutely no desire to inflict harm on another man. His penalties are born almost entirely from blistering dialogues with the Stripes, desperate pleas for fairness, and raw outpourings of passion. Yet, those fleeting seconds of physical friction can rapidly spiral out of control. Basketball scholars have warned for years that this exact emotional vulnerability casts a dark shadow over his squad's championship aspirations. It is never about a single isolated outburst tearing the locker room apart. A lone penalty is easily weathered by a veteran roster without leaving a permanent scar. The true danger lies in the compounding interest of his frustration. Rivals acutely understand he is perpetually dancing on the edge of a ban, fundamentally shifting how they relentlessly attack his airspace. That single piece of behavioral data hands an enormous mental advantage straight to the masterminds patrolling the opposing sidelines. It completely alters the parameters of warfare, empowering a gritty physical defender like Ziaire Williams to ruthlessly test the superstar's breaking point the second they share the perimeter. We also cannot ignore the brutal economics of greatness, because the financial penalty is a deeply tangible chapter in this unfolding saga. Industry experts ran the unforgiving math, estimating the lost wages at roughly $264,000, with some insiders pushing that painful number toward $317,000 based on contract intricacies. Now, for an elite icon who inked an astronomical, multi-season empire-building extension back in August 2025, surrendering that kind of capital will hardly shift the bedrock of his generational wealth. It stings the pride, sure, but it will not break the bank. What that empty paycheck truly embodies, both in spirit and in reality, is the heavy price of failing to walk away when turning your back was the absolute strongest move on the chessboard. Just 10 fleeting, deeply unfortunate seconds of physical entanglement midway through the third frame. A moment where his squad was comfortably cruising with a double-digit cushion, instantly transformed into a $250,000 bonfire and a forced spectator role on Monday evening. It is exceptionally rare to see the exact cost of losing your composure quantified so beautifully. The verdict across the broader basketball intelligentsia, examining the fallout, was completely unanimous. The mechanics of the timing were utterly fascinating. It was a brutal hit to the wallet, yet an absolute masterpiece of scheduling luck when evaluating the pure basketball consequences. The Washington Wizards staggered into that March 30th matchup, carrying a bleak 17-56 record, exhausted on the brutal back end of a two-game set and stripped of their primary weapons. They were a franchise completely surrendering to the draft lottery, fielding a desperately thin rotation, heavily reliant on raw project players and unheralded developmental call-ups. If destiny demands you serve a suspension, this is the exact battle you want to sit out. Pundits swiftly highlighted that Los Angeles remained towering 16-point favorites, even with their maestro locked in the locker room. A point spread that quietly revealed everything you needed to know about the vast gulf in talent between those two rosters on that particular evening. The actual competitive stakes of losing a titan like Luka Doncic against a Washington Wizards franchise that appeared to be actively avoiding victories, an observation candidly shared by the Locked On Lakers podcast crew, sat precisely at absolute zero. Yet, the true gravity of the night wasn't found in the standings. It echoed through the locker room and across the hardwood, demanding answers about roster depth, the crucible of rotation testing, and the vital forging of collective belief. It was about laying the psychological foundation required for the grueling April playoff push, understanding the profound ripple effects of the present moment, and preparing for the storm ahead. Early analysis from Athlon Sports had already painted a clear picture long before the suspension came down. Doncic being forced to sit would inevitably trigger a profound turning point regarding Bronny James and his true place within the rotational hierarchy. Yet, to truly grasp the monumental weight of this specific window of opportunity, you must look deep inside the reality of Bronny James's path with this franchise. He is far from just another rookie grinding for his share of professional minutes. He is a young man battling for his basketball life beneath the most suffocating, relentless, and thoroughly merciless spotlight ever placed upon a developmental prospect in the entire history of the sport. He bears the name of LeBron James, sharing the very same jersey colors as his father. Every single touch of the leather, every fleeting hesitation, every rookie misstep, and every flash of brilliance is instantly dissected, judged, and fiercely debated by millions. And those global verdicts are driven by narratives that extend far beyond the pure boundaries of his on-court performance. The patriarch himself had recently opened up about the steady evolution of his son's game and the unique perspective of a legendary father analyzing one of the most fiercely critiqued aspects of Bronny's skill set. His jumper offered a profoundly revealing glimpse into their world.
It's just getting back to where it was before the incident. He's always been able to shoot the ball. He's shot the ball at a high level.
It was a brush with mortality that radically shifted their universe. According to his father, the physical trauma didn't erase his mechanical talent. Rather, it quietly fractured his inner belief and disrupted his natural rhythm. The underlying greatness remained untouched. The fundamental mechanics were never truly shattered. Healing simply demanded time, relentless repetition, and the slow, quiet stacking of successful outcomes until the body could finally sync back up with a mind that already knew exactly what to do. So, with Luka Doncic relegated to spectator duty in a tailored suit on March 30th, Bronny suddenly inherited a golden chance to stack those vital, confidence-building sequences, more minutes, and touches than he had been handed in any prior contest all season long. Doncic's sheer gravitational pull dictates the entire offensive flow. It is a brilliant system for winning games, but it inherently suffocates the breathing room required for raw prospects to truly discover their rhythm. Remove that superstar anchor, and the basketball begins to hum with a different energy. Opportunities multiply, and for a young guard desperate to rebuild his self-belief, that sudden wealth of touches is absolutely priceless. Yet, simmering beneath the surface of this franchise's journey is another quiet physical setback, a storyline that commands far more respect and deeper analysis than the casual observer is currently offering. This silent crisis collides head-on with the Doncic suspension, transforming what should be a minor rotational tweak into a genuinely troubling architectural flaw for the roster. Marcus Smart, right as the disciplinary action against Doncic was handed down, had already been sidelined for 4 straight matchups due to a vaguely defined ankle problem. However, anyone intimately familiar with how this front office handles medical updates over the course of an 82-game grind understands the sobering reality. The sterile, clinical terms fed to the press rarely capture the dark, complex truth of what a player's body is actually enduring behind closed doors. Smart carried the infamous day-to-day tag, a highly ambiguous classification that, in the unique parlance of this organization, as the Locked On Lakers broadcast crew pointed out with perfectly cynical wit, holds about as much predictive value as trying to guess the weather 3 weeks in advance. The unvarnished truth, woven through the limited fragments of reality we actually possessed, was that no one beyond the inner sanctum of the training staff and perhaps head coach Redick had any real grasp of Smart's physical torment or his timeline for a comeback. That lingering shroud of mystery struck fear into the hearts of those who truly comprehend the immense, stabilizing force Marcus Smart provides when the trenches get bloody and the pressure mounts. The analytical deep dive into his cultural and tactical worth was entirely unequivocal. The chasm between a roster anchored by his grit and one left drifting without it is the difference between true championship contention and utter mediocrity. It goes beyond his elite net rating and raw plus-minus metrics. It lives in his relentless defensive vocalization, his fierce willingness to challenge his own locker room, and his absolute refusal to let a standard slip. These are intangible, battle-tested traits that cannot simply be cloned by the next man up. There is not a single soul on this current roster capable of replicating the primal energy he brings to the floor. His mere presence acts as a rising tide, lifting the competitive spirit of every man beside him, a phenomenal impact that bleeds vividly into both the advanced analytics and the naked eye of the observer. Coach Redick briefly addressed the dark clouds surrounding his veteran guard when pressed by the media during the March 29th training session. He indicated that both Smart and DeAndre Ayton were strictly operating on a day-to-day basis, preaching patience as the staff waited for their bodies to finally greenlight a return to battle. That highly guarded diplomatic tone was undeniably the correct leadership approach. It avoided sparking mass panic across the fan base while refusing to write checks that their battered joints couldn't cash. Yet, beneath the polished media answers, a cold dread remained entirely unresolved. What becomes of this team's ultimate destiny if their defensive heartbeat cannot heal before the postseason crucible begins? Stripped of Doncic due to discipline on March 30th, and simultaneously paralyzed by the ongoing absence of their defensive anchor, the organization found itself limping into battle, completely devoid of two absolute pillars required to execute their ultimate championship vision. Against a fractured team like Washington, surviving that dual loss was merely a chore. But facing the sheer firepower of Oklahoma City or Cleveland down the grueling final stretch of the season, that is an entirely different, highly lethal equation. This is the exact moment where every frayed thread of this narrative, the disciplinary suspension, that history-making milestone for Bronny, the physical toll of the Marcus Smart injury, the grueling pursuit of the Most Valuable Player award, and the chess match for postseason seeding, all of it weaves together into a profound tapestry that transcends its individual pieces. The Los Angeles Lakers of the 2025 to 2026 campaign have proven to be, by every conceivable metric, an absolute heavyweight in the championship fight. They had claimed victory in 14 of their previous 16 matchups before stepping onto the floor against Washington. This roster has forged an unbreakable brotherhood through an absolutely grueling gauntlet of away games, exhausting back-to-backs, and the specific brand of hardship that either fractures a locker room or hardens it into steel. Moreover, this squad boasts Luka Doncic, a maestro who, when fully healthy, laser-focused, and unburdened by looming disciplinary shadows, operates on a plane of existence that makes him virtually impossible to defend against in the modern landscape of professional basketball. When analyzed through a comprehensive lens, the suspension is absolutely not a tragic catastrophe. It is not a dark omen. It is merely a reset, precisely how JJ Redick articulated it, a mandatory evening of rest for an athlete operating at a blistering intensity for months, providing a priceless window for the supporting cast to find their rhythm, while serving as a grounding reminder that even the most transcendent talents on the planet must navigate the rigid frameworks designed to preserve the pure spirit of the game. Luka was slated to make his hardwood return on Tuesday against Cleveland, stepping onto the court with a rejuvenated physical presence he had not felt in weeks, carrying the subtle yet profound advantage of resting his weary legs and temporarily escaping the suffocating psychological weight of fourth-quarter heroics. And the roster welcoming him back? Those brothers in arms who had shouldered the heavy lifting during his absence, inheriting a massive spike in responsibility and proving their mettle by rising to the occasion, would transform into a significantly more battle-tested, deeply confident collective than the unit he had temporarily left behind. Then there is Bronny James, who etched his name into the annals of history alongside his father when this saga first commenced, a young athlete who has been developing in the shadows quietly, methodically, and driven by a deeply rooted sense of personal purpose, flourishing within the disciplined architecture of this organization, ready to harness every ounce of swagger generated from his gritty performance against Washington. It serves as yet another vital metric in the patient, moment-by-moment evolution of a young man who, entirely contrary to his loudest detractors, is executing the exact developmental blueprint required of a second-year professional, consistently absorbing knowledge, refining his craft, and staying fiercely prepared for the exact moment his number is called. Following a grueling matchup against Brooklyn, LeBron James addressed the media, eloquently outlining this exact philosophical mindset required to survive the marathon of a grueling season. You bleed for the moments of true consequence. You exercise smart restraint elsewhere, and you systematically forge the ironclad habits that will define your ultimate legacy when the cruel crucible of April basketball finally arrives. The gateway had cracked open. Bronny stepped boldly through that threshold, and as Luka Doncic returned from his one-game disciplinary absence, fully primed to resume his ruthless assault on the record books, and the Western Conference hierarchy, the narrative of March 27th, 2026, along with its lingering aftermath, would become just another gripping chapter in a legendary campaign still actively forging its own history. Because the final, definitive chapters, the harrowing moments that truly dictate a champion's legacy, were still waiting quietly on the horizon.